talk is Embracing Uncertainties for Innovation. And the speaker for the same is Alexandra Losneanu. Alex works with Brink, where she is the innovation lead on COVIDaction, a program to source and scale innovations for the COVID-19 pandemic. Her keen interest in exploring how uncertainty breeds innovation spans different contexts, from working with the aerospace business leaders to access new markets, to coaching innovators in Africa and South Asia, pivoting to respond to the pandemic. So now let's learn from Alex directly. Over to you, Alex.
Hi, and thank you very much for the introduction, for having me here. I am Alex Losneanu. I am the innovation lead at Brink. We are a boutique innovation practice based in London, working at the intersection of innovation and the behavioral sciences. We call this behavioral innovation, and it powers the way we see the world and the work we do. And we'll explore some of this together today when talking about embracing uncertainty. I'm hoping you can see my screen. Yes, let's try to go back down the memory lane to this time last year. It was March 2020. Do you remember March? And how did we feel back then? How much we knew about what will happen next, and thinking about how much we did not know. This time last year at Brink, we've launched COVIDaction, which was an initiative set out to source and scale innovations from across the globe responding to the pandemic. We looked to offer catalytic funding and venture support to the most promising innovations that we would find. We launched within 24 hours as a spin-off to an existing program that Brink was leading. We brought a new team of multidisciplinary experts ranging from academics, thought leaders in circular economy, data entrepreneurs, health systems experts. It was truly exciting and wonderful, the type of team we were able to pull together in just a matter of days, really, to drive some of this work. And shortly after, I was brought in to lead the work. I've learned very soon in this process that innovation often lies on the side of discomfort. You can see some of those emojis there in the midst of ambiguity, uncertainty, tension, and risk. You might remember March 2020, how we all had to move to work from home. We faced new restrictions, lockdown, there was this uncertainty. There were health concerns. We were concerned by our health, our parents' health, our families. In my case, we had new faces on the team, very senior experts that were leading this work that we've never actually met. They never met with each other. There were unclear budgets. We said, let's prototype, see what happens. We were quite clear on the why, but the how was quite still in motion and still trying to surface it. And it was the very first time that Brink, with our consortium of partners, were doing this type of open call for external innovation. Basically, everyone had questions, and all I ever craved was answers. In this type of uncertain situation, ideally, obviously, I should have been at my most adaptive, try new things, reflect, learn. Yet we've seen very soon that it's really hard to actually have adaptive mindsets in times of stress and uncertainty. And it's really important to understand why what really happens in the brain, because that really will help us understand the context better. And there's something quite physical that happens when we're stressed. Basically, when triggered by external threats, blood is pulled away from our prefrontal cortex, which is the logical, rational part of our brain, towards our limbic system, which is somewhere between our ears. And the limbic system is the oldest reptilian part of our brain that keeps us safe and tells us whether we need to fight, flight, or freeze. This is why it's so hard to actually make good decisions in time of uncertainty. Basically, our brain doesn't like it. our brain hates uncertainty. So I'd say it's quite safe to say that at the beginning of COVIDaction and at the beginning of the pandemic, I was caught in a limbic freeze. Fast forward 12 months, April 2021, today, we've invested in over 30 startups with some remarkable responses to the pandemic, ranging from Asian clay pots converted into hand washing facilities in South Sudan, to new healthcare models that democratize healthcare in Bangladesh, to global epidemiological data models. So full range of innovations responding to the pandemic. We've also, beyond investing in individual solutions, we've started seeing emerging needs from the pandemic. And we've tried to put our heads together to respond to those. And as a result, we've prototyped new global models of collaboration to help clear the path to market for essential products responding to the pandemic, such as oxygen concentrators. Within over 6 months, we've convened product innovators, academics, engineers, the public sector to help pave the way with regulation and financing for oxygen concentrators that are so needed during the pandemic, but also before. We've also looked in this year to design participatory, inclusive models for surfacing innovation. We worked with local organizations in Africa to help us surface offline communities that were not connected to the internet and wouldn't be able otherwise to find out about grant funding and support and opportunities. And while today, in April 2021, of course, there's still a great deal of uncertainty, I would say that the underlying emotions have changed. They're now more around curiosity, imagination, exploration, and trying to see and explore what's next. So what has made this possible? The switch from that limbic freeze that I talked earlier about and me feeling like really paralyzed on, oh my God, what are we going to do? And that reacting mode, to embracing uncertainty and really thriving in this space of curiosity, imagination, and exploration. And there are 5 practices that I'd like to share today that Brink brought when leading COVIDaction. We acknowledged very early on in our journey that you can't always be in control of everything, of course, especially in times of pandemic. But what we are in control of is our own moral purpose. So really trying to go back to the why. COVIDaction exists because we believe that the pandemic is the driving force for long-term resilience, and that technology has a huge part to play in this. We deeply, deeply cared about those areas where both the medium and the long-term impact is likely to be felt most intensely. So these include greener recovery, the democratization of healthcare and strengthen healthcare systems to be able to still support chronic diseases that are beyond the emergency that COVID brought. Access to oxygen, how to use data to inform decision-making in a crisis. And all of our investments and focus was really guided by this moral purpose. We always try to remind ourselves, why are we doing this? And we learned that it's really important to anchor back to purpose and to really constantly having this shared way forward as a team. We also focused on questions over answers. So we used words like, we're going to explore the role of technology versus we'll find the answer on how technology supports the pandemic. We mapped out 4 areas of focus with some big questions and hypotheses that you can see on this slide. But every 2 months or so, we stopped to take stock and to check our insights. We've asked ourselves, what have we learned over, have we found the answer to these questions, which we knew was probably going to be very hard to get. Instead, we've also asked ourselves, are these still the right questions to ask? How can we experiment and test some of these big hypotheses? And it's important that for some questions, we learned that certainty may never be reached, and we just should not even try to aim for certainty. And our focus is on questions over answers, also because in complex, uncertain environments, such as the ones we're in right now, globally, answers have temporary value, whereas questions persist and they can stimulate curiosity, imagination, and really help align everyone to the same goal. We also know that trying to answer some of the biggest questions of our time, like how might we get access to oxygen to vulnerable populations, or how might we ensure the equitable distribution of vaccines? These big questions require cross-sectoral collaboration. We know that this work is bigger than us, and that we are a very, very small part of the collective action. So we relentlessly build networks connected to the wider ecosystems, whether that meant connecting our data innovators with governments of Nigeria to build a vaccine allocation planning tool, or we've worked with innovators in Nepal to help them build a web of production so that they can have better insight into the existing capacity in Nepal when it comes to local production and 3D printing and digital manufacturing capacity and capabilities. Or we brought together communities of local producers not connected to the internet to learn from each other and try to grow together. So networks take different shapes or forms, but what we've learned is that those big questions that I shared with you earlier are better addressed when we can learn and explore them together with our partners and networks. And this whole process and working with our networks really has made the journey much more enjoyable and really helped us navigate uncertainty and get that so much needed clarity. Now, we've built a network, but then we also listen closely to what was emerging from the work of our partners and collaborators. So, for example, some of our data innovators that we've invested in this time last year, that were giving data insight into how best to manage the pandemic, have now pivoted their work to respond to the more emerging needs, such as the equitable distribution of vaccines. We've seen other partners that we had also turn their attention to this. So we followed them on their journey and really changed our focus from to explore how data can be used for the equitable distribution of vaccines, and completely shifted our strategy towards that. So really listening is also key once you build your networks. And from the outset, from day one of COVIDaction, we've started to think about what might be a process that can be applicable for all of those 4 areas that I shared earlier, to really help us structure the work and answer those big questions that we had. And we call it SETS as our framework. Very simple to remember for everyone on the team. Basically, we set out to scan the globe for promising innovation, then evaluate what we find and make sense of what we find and cut through the noise. Team up with experts to offer venture support, and then share what we find with the world as a global good. We've brought world-class experts to lead each of those 4 different areas, but made sure to use this SETS framework as a guide and not a dogma. So we offered space to dial elements up and down depending on what the experts actually believed was suited to each really different area. So we didn't make the calls, we just provided the framework for those big questions at the start to be answered. So to bring it all together, we've anchored our whole approach in our purpose, in our moral purpose, which was to explore how technology might enable the long-term resilience of systems as COVID, in the context of COVID being the driving force for this longer-term resilience. And we tied the other practices to this bigger purpose. And we knew that there was always going to be overlap. And in reality, these don't actually happen in a sequence. It's not as nicely mapped as on a slide. They're much more messy and chaotic, of course. But what we've seen is that once the entire team has really embodied some of these practices and this framework, it helped us ensure that also our networks can then leverage it to continue to answer our shared big questions beyond our direct support or work. So the beauty of this model really is that once you set it up, it will continue to have a life of its own. So we partnered with a local, for example, we partnered with a local organization in Africa to lead the work, the local innovation scouting work I mentioned earlier. We wanted to explore together the big question, how do you connect global resources to local communities to support recovery in a time of crisis? And they took on this question. They went on and activated their own network across 3 African cities to help scout local innovation. They listened to the constraints of their network when engaging with these communities, and they've set up a framework through which their networks were able to deliver direct support to these innovators. And the virtuous circle continued, with their networks taking on this big question, making it theirs, tapping into their own networks, and so on. So it's truly very powerful. So this time last year, if we go back, we didn't really know what specific areas or sectors would most benefit from technology. We take our best guess with the knowledge we had back then. We had no idea what would emerge through our open calls for innovation. And we didn't even know if we would even have a role in the global response to the pandemic. And even though today we know so much more than last year, I'd say we're still innovating in the space of deep uncertainty. But this time around, we know that our 5 practices will have our back, and that they will also support our networks and their networks and their networks to work together and learn together about the potential of technology in the long-term response to the pandemic. Thank you very much. It was lovely to be here. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Alex, for sharing your experience and helping us see through that part of the world. It helps us learn how to approach such uncertain situations and react constructively. Thank you again.